Here are tips and secrets for how I use my Nikon D780. Now the key is, it's not going to teach you how to take great pictures. It's going to teach you how to be a great operator of the D780. To take great pictures, you need to know how to take great pictures, which means how to see a great picture before you take it. Go back to my website and I have lots of articles on how to take great pictures. This is how to set up the D780 and take advantage of all kinds of great features. First off, let's get this baby charged. The way to charge this guy up is USB-C. You can use the included external charger, which is a perfectly good way to charge, especially if you have more than one battery. But honestly, I prefer to just put it back on my desk, plug the cord back in, and you're good to go. While it's charging, the charge light lights, and when you're done, it turns off. The power switch. I always do leave mine on. The only time I ever turn it off is if I put it in a bag or wrap it in a towel or something. For instance, when I travel, I wrap it in a towel, put it on my regular bag in my carry-on so it doesn't look like a camera bag, so that if this button gets pushed, it doesn't take a picture. That's the only time I turn it off. The camera automatically turns off whenever you leave it on. It's not like a mirrorless camera that might run down. I always leave it on so it's always ready to shoot. I wish it had a lock on this power button so I could always make sure it doesn't get knocked off, but it doesn't. That's just the way it is. Lens compatibility. The only lens I ever use on this camera is my 28-300. This lens is ultra sharp. You can look at my review for it and see the proof. If you can't get sharp pictures with this lens, you're probably not a good photographer. But the beauty of it is you can use almost any lens Nikon has ever made since 1959. Here's a lens from 1959. Notice it's marked 5.8 centimeters, f1.4. With these lenses from 1959 through 1977, you need to have them converted to AI, which is either have this ring milled off so that there's a coupling ridge right here. But that's one of the beauties of this camera. If you set in your non-CPU lens data under Menu and Settings, almost at the very bottom, and key in 58 millimeters and f1.2 in the case of this knocked Nikkor, a real knocked Nikkor, not the whatever crazy one, the 095 that they have. The key is this lens shoots great. You shoot this, it reads the aperture in the camera. You can't do that on mirrorless. If you want to use it with an autofocus lens, a traditional autofocus lens that focuses with a motor in the camera that turns this little screw, which turns this autofocus ring, this camera has the little screwdriver there. So these lenses work great. These lenses won't work on mirrorless properly because they won't autofocus in the FTZ, but they work just great on, yes, they work great on my D780. So there's really nothing to know other than be sure to go to non-CPU lens data, and let's just show you that here because I'm that kind of guy. Here we are in settings, and non-CPU lens data is right there. In fact, I put non-CPU lens data in my menu. Here we go, program that any way you like, and there's memories for 10 spots. With the menus, always remember to press OK when you're done because oftentimes the D780 will ignore you, especially when setting picture controls, if you don't press OK after you're done setting the menu. Facial recognition is not on by default. You actually have to turn it on. The way to set facial recognition to work, which is half of the greatness of this camera for photographing people, is you have to go to the custom setting menu. You have to go to A, autofocus, then A4, 3D tracking face detection, and turn it on. If you don't turn it on, which is the default, you don't have face detection. That helps them get better battery life, but I would always leave it on. That's one of the things I always set when I first get the camera. And oh, by the way, all the settings for this camera, you can download them from my website. I have the link in my description. You can just look in the description, go there now, and ignore the rest of this video. Or I'm going to show you exactly what I set and why. Autofocus is set with this collection of controls right here. There's a push button, and when you push and hold that button, you turn these front and rear dials to make changes. Or you have a choice for autofocus or manual focus. Manual focus is simply manual focus. There's no questions about what it does. And autofocus lets you use all the other modes. Press your button, and the front dial controls all the different ways to use the many autofocus sensors. The only ones I ever use are auto, which automatically selects which sensor to use and does facial recognition and so forth. I always use that. If and only if that isn't automatically getting me what I need, then I choose S for single. I don't use any of the other modes. Use them if you want, but I don't. Pressing and holding this button and turning the rear dial controls AFS, AFC, AFA, those different ways in which the autofocus system chooses to focus and lock or continuously focus. AFC is focusing continuously. AFS is a single autofocus where it focuses and then locks and stays locked so you can recompose. AFA is where I usually shoot. It automatically figures out if your subject's moving or not and focuses accordingly. For people photos, I use AFC and Auto AF area select. It finds their eyes, focuses, and tracks them all around the frame as they move. It works great. For places and things, I use Auto AF area again, select, and it locks. For sports, then I will select actually AFC, so it's always focusing. And I'll either use Auto AF Area Select or the 3D mode. With the 3D mode, you have to tell it where to start focusing. So you move the autofocus area over your favorite player, and then it will continue to track that player. Otherwise, if you leave the Auto AF Area Select mode, it'll try to figure out which player to focus on, usually the closest, and go from there. For focus peaking only works during manual focus. With an autofocus lens, it'll only work while you're moving that ring for instant manual focus override. To set that, you go to Menu, Custom Settings, D, Shooting Display, D11, Peaking Highlights, turn that on. You can control how strong it is and what color it is right there. It only works in live view. Hit your live view. For focus stacking, focus shift shooting, you have to enable that in the menu. You go to Menu, go to the photo shooting menu with the camera, and find focus shift shooting, turn that on. When you do that, the camera will make a series of raw files, save them to your card, and it thinks it's done. You then have to import all those 120 megabyte files to your computer, use whatever software you prefer, and try to composite those into a final image. The remote control is fairly obvious. These have been around for decades. What's not obvious is it's easy to lock that by accident, just by knocking it. And then you'll be, this will feel exactly the same. It doesn't lock mechanically. So if for some reason this is ignored, make sure you don't have it knocked into lock by accident. To set the advanced modes, high speed, low speed, you do that by pressing this unlock button. This single shot is continuous low, continuous high, quiet. Quiet continuous is what I usually use, self-timer, and mirror up, which is for long-time exposures. But I'll show you other ways that I prefer to use instead of the mirror up command. For continuous shooting frame rates, you can choose the frame rate at which that works. If you go into the custom setting menu, the little pencil menu here, if you go to the D, shooting display, Delta 1, CL shooting speed, you control how fast it is. I prefer 3 frames per second because I can usually get off one shot by pressing shortly and more shots by holding. If I set this to higher rates, I shoot well. I shoot slow and smooth with my trigger pull here. So I don't get off really quick. So sometimes I'll get more than one shot if I shoot at a higher frame rate for CL. But, that's all personal preference. I always shoot at auto ISO. The way to set auto ISO, the easy way is hold that down. And as you turn the front dial, you see how auto's turning on and off? Automatic means it automatically sets the ISO for you based on the lighting and the motion. If you press ISO and move the rear dial, that sets the ISO. Now, if you have auto ISO on, that sets the ISO, the lowest ISO it will use. The most important setting in all of exposure, believe it or not, because I shoot in program mode and auto ISO and auto everything is the slowest shutter speed. The minimum shutter speed is set in the menus. You have to go to this photo shooting menu, ISO sensitivity settings. I set auto on. Here, minimum shutter speed, it's pretty well hidden. I set 1/25th for people pictures because that's about the slowest speed that I get a sharp people picture with. If I'm photographing things, I set it to auto, meaning the minimum shutter speed is based on the focal length of the lens. If I have a VR lens, I set it to slower because in VR, I can shoot it as slower than 1 over the focal length of the lens and still get an ultra sharp picture. This is actually the most important thing I change. If I'm shooting sports, I'll set it to a 500. Although usually I have it set and programmed here on these U1 and 2 modes that I'll get to shortly. But that changes everything but the camera. That means if the light gets so dim that at the slowest ISO you've programmed, typically ISO 100, if it needs a shutter speed longer than that, it starts increasing the ISO at that lowest shutter speed until it runs out of ISOs as the light gets dimmer. Then only then we'll use a slower shutter speed. So that shutter speed, that pivot point, is very important to set to the slower shutter speed that still ensures that you get an awesomely sharp picture. You can shoot at whatever exposure mode you like. Press this button to release this dial. I shoot in program mode, which is actually what I then program into the U1 and U2. But I shoot in program mode. It chooses the aperture and shutter speed for me. Just turn this dial, and the combinations of aperture and shutter speed will change for you. That's how I get a faster or slower shutter speed. I don't usually use the A or the S modes or the M modes. Exposure compensation is one of the most important controls in this camera. That's this lighter, darker, plus and minus button. Press and hold this. Turn the rear dial. Plus is brighter, minus is darker. Honestly, usually if this picture's a little too dark, I go about plus 07, or if it's a little too light, I go about minus 07. Use whatever you want. I usually go in 2/3 of a stop increments to see what happens, but again, it's an artistic choice, whatever looks good to you. To get the virtual horizon, which is virtually hidden inside this camera, there's 2 ways to do it. If you want to see it on the rear LCD, well, you need to have live view open, and then you press the info button, which is this guy, to cycle through the various options. And you'll see this crazy looking thing that really makes it hard to see your picture. That's how to do it on the rear LCD. To do it in the viewfinder is even better hidden. You have to go to the custom setting menu, F for controls, F3, custom controls, pick one of these controls, and then press that and look around for the level, and that's how you then assign the level to come up in the viewfinder when you press the button of your choice on the camera. To get the finder grid, it's the same thing. You have to go in here. They really keep it well hidden. Go to the custom setting menu, go to D for shooting display, go to D, Delta 10, framing grid display. You could turn that on or off. Notice with all these menus, there's only one option, either on or off, and it's a 3x3 box. Image crop modes. I love cropping my images. In other words, the images come out of the camera square, or I don't use 60x9, but I do love shooting in the square mode. To set that the hard way, you can go to Menu, Photo Shooting Menu, Image Area, and then choose what you'd like, DX or square. I like this so much, I program it to one of my custom buttons. So to do that, I press Menu, I go to the Custom Setting menu, I go to F for Controls, F3, Custom Controls. I select one of the buttons. Personally, I like to select that red dot button there. Boop, choose Image Area. Now when I press and hold this button here, that's the size of the frame in millimeters. You'll notice also that the number of shots you can get on your card varies because as you crop the images, there's less data, so you get more pictures. There's no built-in flash. I love fill flash. So honestly, I use my SB400. My SB400 is a pocket size. Well, not quite pocket size. Cargo shorts pocket size. Flash, it recycles fast. It'll balance if you need it. This is an orange gel that I have here on Velcro, so I can color balance this to tungsten light or to sunset light when photographing people against the sunset. For picture controls, that's where we set the sharpness, how vivid are the colors, the saturation, and so forth. We set these at Menu, Photo Shooting Menu, Set Picture Control. I prefer to shoot in vivid. For sharpening, I leave Quick Sharp alone. I set sharpening all the way up at +9, and I leave everything else the same, except for saturation at, oh my gosh, +3, because Rockwell is insane. That's what I shoot for places and things. For people, I usually set the sharpening all the way up, but I leave the saturation at normal, and I use the standard picture control. You can use whatever you want. This is entirely an artistic endeavor, so whatever looks good to you is what looks good. There's 4 kinds of auto white balances. Holy cow. Auto 1 is usually what you want to shoot. If we press the white balance button here, we can usually set it on top. Auto 1 is the normal auto white balance. Auto 0 is called the keep white. That means if you're shooting indoors with the tungsten light, things will look whiter as opposed to more orange. If you set Auto 2 for keep warm lighting colors, indoor shots will get very warm. There's also this natural light auto. That's a new setting. That's if you're lit only by the sun. It could be the sun through clouds, the sun through shades, the sun indoors through windows. This will keep the camera from trying to get too green or too purple. In other words, if you're shooting a green plant in the shade, sometimes cameras freak out and think, oh, it's fluorescent light indoors and makes things look too purple. Shoot that if you're shooting only by the light of the sun. If you're shooting anything else, leave it in the auto 1, 0, or 2 positions. And honestly, this gets a little complicated. It's best explained at the link in the description to my written user's guide that has examples for all of these things. For flickering lights, normal tungsten lights, not a problem. Sunlight, daylight, not a problem. If you're shooting through LED lights, especially if they're on a dimmer, metal vapor, metal halide, fluorescence. Where we get that to is Photo Shooting Menu, Flicker Reduction. It doesn't actually reduce the flicker. What it does is reduces the effects of flicker. What it does is if the light is flickering, say dimmed LEDs, instead of taking the picture at the instant the LEDs are off, or in the hockey rink when that metal halide lighting goes through the power cycle and it's dim for a zillionth of a second, 120 times a second, it won't take the picture. It'll wait a millisecond or two till light comes back up. Imperceptible to you, but it means all your shots will look good instead of half of them being dark. There is an electronic front curtain shutter release mode to reduce vibration. So if you're on a tripod and shooting ultra long lenses, the way you find that is at Menu, Custom Setting, D, Shooting Display, D5, electronic front curtain shutter. Now also, if you set the exposure delay mode, that means when you press the shutter, the mirror goes up and it waits 2 seconds, even better than using the self-timer, so that there's nothing that moves when that shutter opens because it opens electronically. Go to D4, exposure delay mode, set that. And you can set that to, even a half a second or 1 second. That means that when you press the shutter, it'll wait that period of time and then release the electronic shutter, no noise, no vibration, and then takes the picture. This electronic front curtain mode only works up to a 2000th and only from ISO 50 to 51,000. But, it is something you can do. There's now 2 ways to make long time exposures. I love these. Traditionally, if we go into the manual mode, Under shutter speeds, move the rear dial. Most cameras for the past 20, 25 years go to 30 seconds and then go straight to bulb. But this one, you'll notice, can go all the way to 900 seconds. But it only does that if you go to the custom setting menu, D for shooting display, D6 extended shutter speeds in M, manual mode. Just turn those on, which I've done. If you don't, it'll stop at 30 seconds. If you want to make even longer exposures, when you click one left past bulb, if you click two left, you get to X200. That's the flash sync speed. But these two dashes, that's time exposure. What that means is it takes the picture when you press the button, and the shutter's open this whole time. And then when you press the shutter again, it ends the exposure. It doesn't have any indication on the camera about countdown. You have to time it externally. But the beauty of it is it will let you take a 3-hour-long exposure. You can come back from lunch or whatnot and stop your camera. If you use the long time exposures and actually set them to a value, once you start your camera, it's counting down. It's been so long that cameras have needed to do this and so infrequently that they do. But yes, indeed, counting down here on the top LCD, you can see it. But here's a problem. It won't light up that LCD, which is really too bad because you need the LCD lit. Otherwise, you have to come up to the camera with a flashlight to see it. But hey, progress takes time. For playback, something I've always liked is when my Nikons allow me to just press my OK button and just zoom in. So it's just zoomed all the way in. For instance, that, just zoom in all the way. The way to set that is to go to Menu, go to the Custom Setting menu, go to F Controls, F4, and program what the OK button does. For playback mode, set that to zoom, and then click right. You control the default magnification when you first press that button. If you don't set that, the OK button ignores you when you're in playback and doesn't zoom in. I love my U1 and U2 modes. The way you set those is when you first get your camera, program it, whatever exposure mode, exposure compensations, autofocus modes, everything you want. Then to save your camera setting into one of those dial positions, simply go to Setup menu, Save User Settings, select if you want to save it to the U1 or U2 position, and then I'm not going to save it now, but click right a couple times and say, OK, it's now saved into those settings. And then whenever you go to those, it immediately recalls whatever you programmed into them. To change them, simply recall them, change what you want, and resave it into the same register. Make sure that you're saving into the proper one, because if you save the other into the other, you just erased one. To save and recall everything about the camera, including what you programmed to U1 and U2, but all of your copyrights and every possible setup of every menu, go to the bottom of the setup menu. Notice at the top of the setup menu is Save User Settings. The setting we're looking for now is called Save Menu Settings, which again is not very clear language, I'm sorry, but if you do that, you can save them or load them from a card or save them to a card. Now again, on my website, I've actually got my file you can copy to a card in your computer. It's not going to do anything on your computer or in your browser. It's just data. Copied onto the top level of your card, not in any subdirectory. Put your card in the camera, then you can recall from there. And before you do that, be sure to save your settings in case you don't like my settings. And also on my side, I have a default setting from when my camera was brand new. And that's a beautiful thing, because if I send my camera out for service, if I get a second one, if I get a loaner, if I get a rental, I can just copy my settings. Admittedly, I post them on the internet so I can get to them, copy them to the card, and then what usually takes me half an hour every time I get a new camera to set up every possible menu is just set. And that's it. That's just a few tricks specific to my Nikon D780. I hope you like them. This is Ken Rockwell of kenrockwell.com, where you can learn far more than I have here on YouTube. I've got everything for over 20 years. I've got over 50 years of shooting experience, 40 years of shooting Nikon, and 20 years posting it on the internet at kenrockwell.com. Thanks for joining me, and I'll also see you on kenrockwell.tv.